Hello and welcome back, you 24 to 36-year-old fellow feral queers. I'm D, also known as DKRO on Marvel Snap, and today we're going to be doing some deck techs, some budget Pool 3, just add one card deck techs. I hope you enjoy. Alright, so just before we get started, I do want to ask, we are blowing up on this channel like a balloon with a grenade in it, and we hit 30 some odd subscribers. We're shooting still for 100 is the next goal. If you could help me reach that, if you enjoy my content, you find it elucidating, enlightening, or enriching, please hit that subscribe button. It helps so much. Thank you. So the first deck we're going to talk about today is, so the idea behind each of these decks, I did Pool 1 and 2 only decks. These are basically to say, if you get one single card from Pool 3 and it happens to be this card, just add X. This would be the deck that you could use with only Pool 1 and 2 cards, and then that single Pool 3 card. We're also going to cover upgrades that you could then go into if you get more than one Pool 3 card that falls into that category, but that's the idea, right? Is sort of like baby's first Pool 3 deck, okay? So say you very early in your Pool 3 get Leader. This would be the just add Leader deck. The idea behind it, so Leader, if you don't know, 6'3", he just got nerfed fairly recently. He's going to be nerfed again. This deck may end up out of date fairly quickly, so feel free to skip ahead. I'll have it tagged. If Leader gets nerfed again, this probably doesn't hold up. He's a 6'3", on reveal, copy all cards your opponent played this turn, but on your side. Now, what this functionally means is that if you are ahead in 2 lanes and you have more room than your opponent, you usually win. Now, this can get undone by your opponent playing synergistic cards. So if your opponent plays on turn 6 a Cerebro, and their whole deck is built around Cerebro, they will get more out of that than you will, and they might still win, even though you fulfilled all the requirements of being ahead in 2 lanes and having more space available than your opponent. It's still possible to lose. So it's not a guaranteed win, but it's a really, really strong play. It's basically everything your opponent is doing plus 3 power. So how do we maximize the chance of both the other 2 qualifiers being true, right? Being ahead in 2 lanes and having as much space as possible. Well, we do that by having cards that are overstated. So Sunspot grows every turn that you don't spend some amount of your energy. Sunspot is just a good card in general. You were probably playing the Infinite deck at some point in Pool 2. Sunspot Infinite. This is, you know how good Sunspot is. We got Iceman. This is just to stop your opponent from deploying multiple decent threats, because the slower that they can deploy, the better off you are, right? Iceman also just a very good card. We got Scorpion, same sort of thing. It's a 2/2, but if you play it on 2, it's more like a 2/6 because it has reduced so many stats out of your opponent's hand. Armor is mostly a tech card, but it also protects our Sunspot, so it can be used as a 1/2 in the Sunspot lane, but very, very often we're using, this can be a lot of different cards if you're running into different decks. I like Armor a lot as just the vanilla stat line, but feel free to make this quite a few different cards based on what you like. Some other ones might be Shang-Chi or Enchantress. Yeah, we're running Enchantress. It might be Shang-Chi, it might be a number of cards, but for us, for right now, it's Armor. Lizard is just really good. I can't say enough good things about Lizard. This can kind of mess up the math on Leader sometimes, but again, in general, your opponent isn't putting 4 cards into any lanes, so just be aware. If they are, the math changes. Even if you get copies of their cards, your Lizard might shrink, so that can be detrimental, but in general, Lizard is more there to win a lane that your opponent isn't trying to contest right away, and he does a great job at that. Mr. Fantastic gets you into sticky locations and also, again, helps with the idea of having to be ahead in 2 lanes. Like, if you Mr. Fantastic center and you're fighting over center and left, and your opponent isn't fighting over right, they now have to commit something right just to overcome the inertia of you having +2 power there. And when they commit something there, your leader copies it. And you didn't commit any real cards there, so it's really hard for them to win that race. Enchantress is our other tech card. It only really hits... It only negatively affects our Lizard, or our armor and our Mr. Fantastic, but it positively impacts our Lizard, because it removes all the ongoing abilities of cards at this location. So if you put it in the lane with Lizard, she silences that -3 power deficit off of him, and he becomes a vanilla 2/5, so that's like an upside. But mostly she's here to hit our opponent's stuff, because, again, one of the ways that we lose is our opponent doing really synergistic things, and that often looks like ongoing things, right? Wong, because they get double Wong triggers and you don't, they will win the race on turn 6, but if you Enchantress their Wong, then you and your opponent both get the same single ongoing, or on reveal effect, and that's how you can like bring yourself back into being in the race. Jessica Jones, just a really strong 4-drop. This will be upgraded when you find better 4-drops in Pool 3, but in general, just a good 4-drop. Takes up 1 slot, gives you 8 power. Great card. White Queen gives you information, and if you don't have leader, it usually gives you a 6-drop. So this is just kind of like doing a lot of the same stuff as leader, but differently, right? Like if your opponent's plan is to just play their big 6-drop on 6, and you now have the same copy of it, but you're ahead in 2 lanes, then great, like you're winning that game. Hobgoblin, we are trying to not fill our side of the board, so Hobgoblin fills their side while also effectively granting you power, so just a good card for this archetype. Leech, 5/3, on reveal, remove all abilities from all cards in your opponent's hand. The reason Leech and Leader go together so well is, again, as I pointed out before, you're going to lose to very synergistic stuff. Your opponent being able to play, like, Silver Surfer on turn 6 when their deck is built around it is going to cream you. And if you just remove the ability of Silver Surfer to do anything, then they have no outs to your leader if you're ahead. This is a tempo loss. He's like our worst statted minion other than leader himself, but usually is still the best turn 5 play, but it can be enough tempo that you start losing 2 lanes, and that can be tough. And then we already covered leader. So that's sort of the base. If you have leader and nothing else from Pool 3, this is like a very solid way to enter into that deck. But because I'm so good at what I do, we have an additional upgrades slot here. So Polaris is really good. This is so part of this is that I don't have these cards, so I had to put like placeholders to remind me of what to tell you. So Polaris is good. Move an opposing 1 or 2 costs to this location. It forces your opponent to fight you at a location that you want them to fight you at, or gives them less space to work with in a location that you are already ahead at. So you understand what I'm saying, I think. It can use up some of their slots at a location where now they're priced into playing like a 6-drop, and you're going to leader, and if they only have the 1 spot open and you have 2, because you Polaris something, they don't have the flexibility of playing multiple cards that might interact negatively with what you want to do. The thing is, Polaris isn't the best at this. The best is Arrow, but I don't have Arrow. But Arrow is like Arrow, Leech, Leader all go together really well. Arrow, if you don't know, is a 5. I think she's a 5/6 now. She got nerfed pretty recently, but she's still very good. That says on reveal, move all the cards your opponent played this turn to this location. So she can like sneaky fill a lane that your opponent didn't want filled. She can move cards, like she can move you know, your opponent has a Wong, she can move the cards out of the Wong lane before they get revealed. She can do all kinds of stuff, but the point is she also does what Polaris does, and she forces your opponent to fight you in lanes that they weren't planning on, that you are already ahead in, and that you have more space than they do. And all those things are really good for leader, right? So that the Polaris is good, Arrow is better, but they're both like, they should both find spots. Polaris is also a reminder for another card, Maximus, who's a 3/7, just very overstated, like sort of guarantees that you're going to be winning that lane. The downside is he draws your opponent 2 cards on reveal, but that downside is mitigated by the fact that whatever cards they draw, if they try to deploy on turn 6, they're your cards too. You know, like, it doesn't matter how much card advantage they have. If you die, like, that's the thing in like Magic, is like, if you die with 20 cards in your hand, you still lost, right? It's the same here. It's like, it doesn't matter how many cards they have if they lost at the end of all of it. And most decks don't have an effective way of actually like playing out more than the amount of cards that they can, right? Like, Maximus is really bad against my deck. Like, it's bad for them against my like negative deck or my Deathwave deck, because I can actually utilize the extra cards that they draw me. But against a lot of decks, it's like, okay, you drew another 4 and a 3 drop. Like, that's only really 1 card because you can't deploy both of them. Like, you know, you can play the 4-on-4 or like the 3-on-4, but it didn't really generate them anything except options. But it didn't generate them power. So Maximus is another option for this deck. I don't have him, but Green Goblin. I put Hobgoblin here. We already have Hobgoblin in the deck, but Green Goblin is another really good option for the same reason, except that you can deploy him earlier. I'd say Green Goblin's even more powerful because the downside to Hobgoblin is that sometimes your opponent fills the lane on turn 5. Like, in general, that's not a good play. You really should wait till turn 6, if at all possible, to fill most lanes. But sometimes you're just going to do it on turn 5, and then your opponent is just going to, like, Hobgoblin you, and it's going to be stuck on their side because it can't come to your side of the field. I didn't get it on camera, but I had a hilarious one last night where my opponent Hobgoblined into Cloning Vat on 5, but I filled Cloning Vat, and then so it got stuck on their side, so they lost the Cloning Vat. And then they were like, okay, well, I'll just do it over in this other lane. And then I filled that lane on turn 6, and they just got stuck with 2 of their own Hobgoblins, and it was very funny, and I wish I got it on film. Vision is actually Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel, the card that at the end of the game will fly to a location that wins you the game if possible. I don't have her either, but, you know, again, like, the fact that you can deploy her into, like, an empty lane and sort of do the Mr. Fantastic thing of, like, well, now your opponent has to either commit there or let it be a tie, a pseudo tie, because she'll fly away to leave that tied if it can win you the game, puts a lot of pressure on your opponent and makes it really awkward for them to play. She's just good in a lot of ways. And then Dr. Doom, if you've seen my leader decks, you know that I play Doom and leader side by side pretty often because they do a lot of the same thing. If you're ahead in 2 lanes, it's really hard for an opponent to commit 5 power to 2 different lanes, 5 power plus their deficit to 2 lanes, and sometimes this 5 will also pull you ahead in the lane that you deploy him, like the 3rd lane. And so if you don't have leader in your hand on 6, Doom can do a lot of the same things. So that's the just add leader deck plus upgrades. Okay. Next up, we have Cerebro. Just add Cerebro. If you get Cerebro, immediately make Cerebro 2. It's really powerful. The other numbers can be done, but 2 is the easiest one and, like, really powerful. So the idea is Cerebro, ongoing, your highest power cards get +2 power. So as long as all your cards are tied for the highest power, they all get +2. Every card you play will get +2. So we have just everything that has 2 or less, in some cases, power, with the exception of Blue Marvel, who gives your other cards +1 power. So because he has 3 power, and he's giving all your others +1, they will also have 3, so then everything will get the buff, including Blue Marvel, because he doesn't hit himself with that +1 power buff. So, just great. Other than that, like, anything that has 2 power that does not stray from 2 power, I guess, like, what I wouldn't include in this deck is Agent 13, because you will sometimes forget that you can't play the card that she drew you, right? Functionally, Agent 13 is just a vanilla card. There are times where the card she draws, I suppose, can be useful, like if you get like an Iron Man that you didn't already have, or a Hobgoblin or a Green Goblin, but in general, you're gonna just forget and play the card sometimes, and or you're gonna play it and then draw your Cerebro on 6 and be like, well, wish I hadn't played that card because now I can't Cerebro. Same with Mantis. Like, Mantis can pull a card out of their deck, which can be good for info gain, but then again, like, you run the risk of just forgetting that you can't play that card. I'd just play Misty Knight before either of them, but here's the other funny thing. Misty Knight actually has a downside in this deck, which is that if Washington, D.C. flips up as a location, Misty Knight can accidentally get plus power and lose you the game, because now she has the highest power, because DC buffs any card that has no abilities. So Misty Knight actually has a slight downside in Cerebro too. Oh, I forgot. Okay, quick aside. The leader deck, just so we're clear, without Doom, leader has a hard time with any location that's hard to get in, because we only have Mr. Fantastic to do that. And any location that either stops on reveals, right, like nowhere, or doubles ongoings, because they, you know, our opponent gets us with ongoing. So Onslaught Citadel, those are the types of locations that we don't like. Funny enough, the District X that replaces both players' decks, leader is usually really, if you already have leader in your hand, is really good into those situations. Other than that, I genuinely do not know the answer to if you're supposed to play leader early, if your opponent waves, or if you get bonus mana, or if leader's cost gets reduced somehow. I don't know if you're supposed to play him early or not. There's probably math on it somewhere. The answer is I usually do. I assume that my opponent is going to play like a big swing turn, and I just try to copy it, and sometimes I get them and sometimes they get me, and I don't really know the answer. So those are locations that are good and bad. You have armor for Death's Domain type stuff. I mentioned that there's been a lot of destroy locations recently, so you have some kind of out to that, but yeah, that's okay. So that's that. All right. Cerebro. So obviously, Cerebro has more locations that it has to look out for, because it's a more specialized like strategy, right? Leader is just like generic good stuff, the deck. Cerebro is a more specialized strategy. So the thing is, you can't play into locations that reduce power, but you also can't play into locations that increase power. And that one can be really frustrating. Like, there's so many times where like Nidavellir shows up and it basically is just bar with no name. It's like it's just the worst location, right? So that's not great. And there's some fixes later on in Pool 3 Plus, but for the base one, you don't have a lot of ways to get around this just unfortunate fact. So yeah, that's locations. Sorry, that's like off topic. For the rest of the deck, you're just playing 2 power stuff. Again, Iceman's always good. Scorpion's like very good. You're probably going to see them in a lot of decks, especially early in Pool 3. Some other disruptive elements in Korg and Storm. And then Iron Man doubles your power at this location while not actually having any himself. So he gets around the Cerebro. Like, you know, it's tough to play high cost things in this deck because almost all of them have more than 2 power, but it's possible, and this is how. You could also play Hobgoblin or Green Goblin. Well, we'll get into that. Hobgoblin is another option for the Iron Man slot. I prefer Iron Man over Hobgoblin because of what I outlined with the last deck, how there's an amount of times, a non-zero amount, that you're going to play Hobgoblin and your opponent's going to fill the lane and you're going to feel really bad and lose the game. So that's it. Like, the deck is really self-explanatory. Oh yeah, sorry, I got off topic. Don't play Agent 13, maybe Mantis, maybe Uatu is a fairly strong contender. If you want a deck that gives you more information about the game, Uatu and Yondu are both pretty good. Uatu lets you see locations before they're revealed, and Yondu removes the top card of your opponent's deck. Again, this isn't a bonus unto itself, except that it gives you information, but like, removing the top card on its own is not just a positive thing. Quicksilver's fine. I don't know. I just don't like Quicksilver. And then Cable's the other one to watch out for, because the same as Agent 13, like, while Cable can give you info about what your opponent is playing and what they no longer have access to because you're taking it out of the bottom of their deck, you will sometimes forget that you can't actually play it, and then you'll lose, and it's just a feel bad moment. Additional upgrades. Beast is so funny. Beast is so funny. On reveal, return your other cards to your hand. Your other cards at this location in your hand, they cost 1 less. So if you do like Iceman, Scorpion, Korg, Beast on turn 3, and then replay all of those, and you've just like reduced your opponent's the power in their hand by like 8 over the course of 3 turns or 4 turns, and then like increase the cost of 2 different cards by 1, and then like shuffled 2 rocks into their deck. They're just like, it's miserable. It's miserable to play against. It feels really bad, and you'll just get some amount of people retreating. And then like they also have to overcome a Cerebro, and then they hate their life. Goose, you don't have 4, 5, or 6 cost cards. You only have 2 of them. So in general, this is a really safe play, but it can get you. There's some amount of like, be careful about how to play this, but in general, it affects your opponents way more than it affects you. Hazmat comes with a caveat. I don't have Luke Cage. Luke Cage would be the first card to add to this deck, because Luke Cage says your cards can't have their power reduced. So suddenly, Sewers and the negative zone, and there's the other one that give -1, 2, and 3 power respectively, does not affect your cards anymore with Luke Cage out. If you have Luke Cage, Hazmat is also somewhat viable, though they really are a package deal. I would include Luke Cage without Hazmat, but you cannot include Hazmat without Luke Cage. Mystique is the best upgrade that you can get. Mystique is just another Cerebro. Luckily, they're both 3 costs, so you can Cerebro and Mystique on 6 and put, like, 70 power. That's not true. You can put a ton of power on the board in a way that your opponent isn't going to predict most of the time. Wong is more for the Hazmat version of the deck. He doesn't, like, getting double Iceman, Scorpion, Korg effects is fine, but getting like double Hazmat with a Luke Cage out is game winning. So this is another sort of asterisk one. Wong just doubles your on reveal effects with his ongoing. And then Green Hobgoblin's just Green Goblin. It could also be Hobgoblin, but I covered why I like Green Goblin more. All right. This is the just add negative deck. So if you open Mr. Negative, that's Mr. Negative, as your first pool 3 card, this would be how you would build that deck. Again, Sunspot. We're kind of pressed for cards, which is why Sunspot's included here. He's not bad. You do end up floating a bit of energy with the negative deck, but not as much as some other decks. This slot's fairly open to interpretation. Anything that has the same stats is okay, but I prefer Sunspot because he's got the very, very necessarily he has low power. So like a 1/1 is better than a 3/3 if it gets negative, because like you can still play out other stuff, if that makes sense. Where like a 3/3 negative didn't give you any bonus, but also you probably can't play anything else in your hand for that turn, and it becomes more awkward. So I like Sunspot. Angela, so this is a great card to hit with negative, and then she's also just good so that you can have some semblance of a curve before that. A 2/0, every time you play a card here, she gets 2 power, so she can end up as a 2/6. If she gets negative, she can end up as a 2/8. If you put Sunspot in the lane and they Killmonger, she can get up as a 2/10. Like the weird situations where that happens. Forge, another like kind of weak inclusion, but like we're working with what we got here. He's a 1/2 when he's flipped that gives +2 power, so he's like a 1/4 in total stat to power ratio. But as a 2/1 that gives +2 power, he's okay. He's not like the worst you could be doing. That's just a vanilla. That's just a 2/3 stat line. But funny enough, you can throw him into a lane that you're not really intending to fight over. So like you can throw Forge into like Danger Room, and I love doing stuff like this. You just throw a 1 power card into Danger Room and see if you win the coin flip of it destroying your card or not. And now your opponent's priced into like playing a real card there while you just have your Forge that already gave you the on reveal. And it's like, if he gets destroyed, it doesn't matter. And if he doesn't get destroyed, it's great. Ironheart, another absolute MVP if it gets flipped to a 0/3 that also gives +6 power to something else, to other things. But as a 3/6, right, a 3 cost that gives +2 to 3 different things, like a 3/6 is very good. The downside being you have to have 3 other cards, but like that's not that bad a downside. It just means you can't play Ironheart on 3 most of the time. That's fine. Bishop, incredible card while flipped. Decent card. I've covered Bishop a bunch of times on this channel, but like a 3/1 that you just play a card on 4, 5, and 6 is a 3/4, which is not terrible. It's just not great. But a 3/1 that you play like 2 cards, 1 card is like, you know, a 3/6, and that's quite good, and it can go higher than that. So Bishop's great, and if you invert him to a 1/3 that also, you know, like on turn 6 playing a 1/3 and then playing 2 more cards is like, okay, well he's a 1/5 on turn 6 plus you played some other stuff. Great card. Wolfsbane, basically the same thing, a 3/1 that gets plus power, and that's like what, as you've probably noticed that a lot. We're playing a lot of things that themselves don't have a lot of power but have ways of gaining more. So like, yeah, a 1/3 that gains +2 for each other card you have here is incredible. Storm, kind of a weak inclusion. I don't know how much I love Storm in the negative list I play, but I still play her some of the time, so maybe she's not that bad. The ability to remove a problem location is just really good. It has so much utility that I think the fact that like her inverted stat line isn't game breaking is like worth it. The only awkwardness that happens is sometimes you'll Storm on 3 and then draw Mr. Negative, and you're priced into putting negative in the flooding and giving it up forever. That's fine though. Like that's fine sometimes. Like you have a good chance of winning the other 2 lanes pretty often. Negative obviously just flip-flops the power and costs of all cards in your deck. You've seen, I have a bunch of videos on the negative lists. He's really good. This deck's a lot of fun. Now we're getting into the sweet spot. Iron Man becomes so Iron Man we've covered in other lists. Like Iron Man's just a good card. You play him in some amount of lists, right? But with negative, he becomes a 0/5 that then doubles your total power at that location. And it's just like, it's incredible dropping a 0 cost Iron Man on turn 6 into a lane that you had no right winning. White Tiger is a 5/1 that sends out a 7 power tiger to another location at random. Having her invert to a 1/5 that sends out, so you know, a one cost 12 total power over 2 lanes, pretty good, pretty good. Blue Marvel becomes a 3/5 that buffs your other cards by +1 power, just very good, and on his own is fine. Like, we don't have Silver Surfer, because I'm assuming you don't have that card, but this is kind of doing the same thing as Surfer. It's not as good in a lot of ways, but in other ways, there are definitely games that I would have won had I played Blue Marvel instead of Silver Surfer, because I had, like, Psylocke and Negative in a lane that got flooded, right? So, plus Storm, and then, you know, I just, like, yeah, it doesn't matter. The point is, like, Blue Marvel is fine in this list, and, like, very good if you invert him. And then Leech, as a 3/5 that silences your opponent's hand, really good. Just a very good card. And, like, especially with once you negative, you kind of want to draw some of your 0 cost so that you can surprise your opponent on 6. But, like, barring that, drawing Blue Marvel and Leech and just being able to, like, leech them and have 5 power, and then, like, well, that was a 3, so you could also do Forge, right? Because that's like a 2 cost, and you already had him in your hand. And then whatever you draw next is just all really good. But it gets better. Because Adam Warlock is a meme, but this is the only deck you can play him in, so do it. Like, if you have Adam Warlock, this is the deck for him. Just, like, if you want to play him, do it. You know, live your truth. This also is a reminder for me for Bast, which I don't have. Bast is a 1/1 that sets the power of all the cards in your hand to 3. So usually on turn 1, if you have negative in hand, I mean, you saw how low the power was on all those cards. Bast fixes that. It fixes your opening hand to be basically negatived or kind of better in some ways. And then you negative, and it means that every card you played had way more impact than it should have. Adam Warlock especially. If Adam Warlock comes down on turn 2 as a 2/3 and just starts drawing you a card every turn, that's really, really hard for your opponent to beat in a lot of ways. Psylocke is maybe the most important pickup, which is silly because she's not very good, very good in a lot of ways, but she's a 2/1 that gives you +1 energy next turn, so she lets you Mr. Negative on 3. So Psylocke on 2 into negative on 3. I always say the best time to negative is as early as you can, right? The only bad time really is 6. 5 is sometimes suspect, but 3 is exceptional. Going along with that, I don't have her, but Magic is a 5/3 that sets 1 locational limbo. Honestly, if I had Magic, that's who I'd replace Storm with, I think, because it gives you an extra draw for your negative. Like, you know, if you've negatived, you can now draw an extra card because there's an extra turn in the game. It gets rid of a problem location, and then if she flips, she's a 3/5 that also gets rid of a problem location. So it's just, she's like, she would be the card for this. Yeah, so you just want as many draws. That's also why the Adam Warlock thing works so well. Because if you negative and Adam Warlock draws you 1 card, he has already paid for himself way with interest. Mystique. So if Iron Man is good as a 5/0 that doubles power, Mystique is great as a 3/0 that doubles power. And if one of them is negatived, so that you can play both in the same turn, right? Because they'll both be 0 cost, no matter which one gets negative. You will win basically all your games. If your opponent Cosmos or Enchantresses, fine, that happens. But if not, in general, if you have both and one has been negatived, you stand a really good chance at winning that game. Mystique is incredible. Surfer, if you have the Surfer, this deck list looks a little different, but in general, Surfer is quite good with this deck for the same reason Ironheart is good, because it becomes a 0 cost 3 power with more power getting spread out to other units. Going along with that, Brood would be incredible. I don't have Brood, so I don't play Brood because you play with the cards you got, But Brood in general would be really good for this deck, and in the Silver Surfer variant is basically unbeatable. Zabu, Zabu is here, but I don't know if I agree with it. I just see a lot of people run Zabu. There's some cards here that I see other people play, so I've included them. I tried a Zabu Surfer negative list that I've like seen making the rounds. It does not work for me. I wish you luck. So I've included Zabu, but I don't know if that's accurate. Jubilee might actually be a pool 2 card now that I think about it. But I think she's included here for sort of the Zabu reason. Like, I suppose if you're doing a Zabu thing, Jubilee can be better, but also like I tried Jubilee as like a stand-in, like, oh, you know, on 4 if I don't have Mr. Negative, I can Jubilee and try to hit either one of my big impactful cards or Mr. Negative. Like, it's a second look at a negative. I ended up really not liking it, especially in the Surfer list. There's just so many cards that you want to play on 6 that Jubilee can really mess your plans up. As an inverted, as a 1/4 after you negative, and then pulling out another card that has been negatived, especially on turn 6, where like it doesn't matter, you just want all those buffs and all those stats, I could see it working, but yeah, I don't play her. Wong. I absolutely play Wong. Wong is incredible. Wong is another Mystique card, but also so many of your cards are on reveals because, like, you know, they have good on reveals but bad stats that Wong just breaks them in half. It's just so good. This is another card that I've tried out and was not happy with, but I've seen a lot of people playing these lists. I think they can be a lot of fun, but I don't think they're the most effective use of your slot. Jane Foster, the Mighty Thor, is a 5/8. On reveal, draw all cards that cost 0 from your deck. So normally she gets paired with Thor, who shuffles a 0-cost Mjolnir into your deck that buffs himself. But in this deck, if you negative and then you play Jane Foster on 5, you'll draw like 3 or 4 cards that all win you the game on their own. But if she's still in your deck and she becomes an 8/5, that's just a dead draw, she doesn't do anything. And also, sometimes your hand is really full and you only draw like 2 cards. And sometimes, and I just don't like her. I don't think she's good enough for this particular deck. So I don't play her, but it can be really fun. It can, like, I think she's sort of like Doc Ock. Like, I want to play her because I want those clickbait moments, but like, I don't want to lose all my cubes by playing her, so I don't. A different take on the deck is Arnim Zola. If you're doing Zola, you might play like Devil Dino as well, because Devil Dino becomes a 3/5 that gets +2 per card in your hand, which is just very good. And then Zola becomes a 0/6 that can then destroy your Dino and put it in the other 2 lanes as well. This is just a different take on the deck. I have not tried the Zola list, but like a 0/6, you know, say you had just even a base level Iron Man, like the 5/0 variant, not the inverted, and you just Zola'd it on 6 and put it in both of your other lanes, and then we're still able to play something else on top of Zola. Because the downside to the Arnim Zola deck is that usually you just lose the lane that Zola goes in, because you only put one big thing there, and then you destroyed it with Zola, and then Zola has 0 power himself. So, like, you lost the lane, but you hopefully won the other 2. Well, with the inverted list, that's not always the case. You can just also sometimes win that lane. It's great. And then Doom, again, is sort of like, he's the last card intentionally, because he's not incredible when flipped to a 5/6. That still also summons 6/5s. But he's fine. And, like, there, as you saw as I was going through the deck list, there's enough cards that are kind of suspect to begin with that this could just replace some of them and be good. And again, like, you're not going to hit your negative in every game, and then Doom is like quite a good 6-drop, especially early on. So yeah, contender, but I have all these other cards, so Doom and Zola never make the cut. So Oh, and then for the negative deck, mostly you're okay with tough to get into areas because you either have Mr. Fantastic or White Tiger. You're mostly okay with areas that interestingly, areas that destroy stuff are good because you can put negative there and have it destroyed and then White Tiger into it later. Areas that give... Bar with no name. That was the one. So Bar with no name, whoever has the least power wins. This is the only deck I've ever played that has an actual way to try to win that location by just playing Mr. Negative into it. It's just funny that you can do that. All right, just add Patriot. So this is a Patriot deck. I do not have Patriot, so that's the missing slot is Patriot. He is a 3/1 that says all your cards without abilities get plus power. Oh, I think it's 2. I believe it's 2 power. I'm pretty sure. Okay, so Squirrel Girl herself doesn't get it, but each of the squirrels doesn't have any abilities, so they will get the plus power. Misty Knight is just, you include all the vanillas, right? Shocker, Misty Knight, Cyclops, who shouldn't be a vanilla, but is. The Thing, who should shuffle rocks in your opponent's deck, but he doesn't. Abomination, and Hulk. And then I guess I'll just cover the stuff that you might not have thought about. So Squirrel Girl, the squirrels have no abilities. Mr. Sinister, the clone, has no abilities, which is why we include him. Cosmo it's really easy for us to play around on reveal stuff, but it's much harder for our opponent to play around Cosmo. And also our big payoffs are ongoings, not on reveals, so Cosmo covers them from getting Enchantress or whatever. White Tiger, the Tiger Spirit, has no abilities, so it gets the +2. I'm just saying 2. I might be wrong. I'm going to keep saying 2. And then Blue Marvel is just sort of a generic good thing as a 5/3 that, you could see we're swarming the board pretty heavily. So, just gives a bunch of plus power to a bunch of different lanes. Obviously, Washington, D.C., which gives you plus power to cards that have no abilities, is great. Other than that, the Patriot deck is kind of just a good stuff deck. Obviously, Onslaught Citadel is good because it doubles your ongoings, but it also paints a huge target because, it's good. Onslaught Citadel's good. Avoid the place that doesn't, ongoings are disabled. We don't really care about nowhere, on reveals being disabled. And we do okay with cost reduction stuff, but we don't generally get as much out of it as our opponents, so just beware. Additional upgrades for that: Wasp has no ability and is a 0/1, so she can really get your opponent, a 0/3. Just being able to deploy this on top of anything else is just really good. What was Squirrel Girl supposed to represent? I don't remember. Maybe Doom, but I have Doom, so that would be weird. I don't... Oh! Ultron! That's right, because they're the 1/1. Ultron is a 6 cost that puts 1 cost, 1 power, no ability. Basically, he puts squirrels. He fills all your other lanes with squirrels. So he's like a 6/8 that fills your other 2 lanes with what are functionally squirrels, which is why Squirrel Girl represents Ultron in this scenario. So yeah, it just adds a bunch of power to your Patriot play on turn 6. Your opponent doesn't usually see oh yeah, they could add 9 here and 6 here and 8 here. So Mr. Sinister, this is just a straight upgrade for this deck is Brood, because Brood makes 2 Broodlings, which are just the Sinister clones, but you get 2 of them instead of 1, so it's just better. Mystique is actually representing Mystique here. She copies Patriot really well. Blue Marvel, she copies just fine. Mystique's just very good. Mystique is a really great universal pickup. Like, if you're wondering what cards to get out of your pool 3, or if you see her in the shop, get Mystique. And then Silver Surfer, there's a variant of the list. You kind of need Broodling as well, I believe. But there's a variant of the Patriot list that's like a Patriot Surfer, because Patriot's a 3-cost, and Brood, which is like a really good card, is a 3-cost. So buffing Patriot plus Brood with Surfer, and then buffing Brood with Patriot, and like Mystique with Surfer, and it's just like a really synergistic plan that can add a bunch of power in a lot of different ways, so that's cool. Also, I didn't include it, but I just reminded myself, Dr. Doom, again, the Doombots have no abilities, so you can add 7 to 2 lanes and 5 to 1 lane, and get your opponent with that. Really good. One more. I counted this time. We actually have 5 decks, so you should be proud. This is just add Wong. So if you really like the Pool 2 Odin deck, and you get your hands on Wong, it's the same kind of thing. It's a little different. So Nova is an interesting include. So alright, the thing is, a lot of people fall into this trap with Odin, where they're like, oh, I'll get extra like on reveals, but it's like a Scorpion, which doesn't matter on turn 6, or Iceman, or Okoye. But there's a really funny thing you can do here, where you can Killmonger to blow up your Nova earlier in the game, and then your opponent will be like, they don't have Killmonger anymore. But then on turn 6, you Odin and Killmonger again, and you get them because they think they're safe to deploy all their 1-drops, like the Zoo decks. And there's some value in that, but mostly Nova is here to buff everything else, because you're usually going to Killmonger on 6 anyway. And it's just funny. Nova is maybe the most suspect, is going to be like one of the early replacements, but I like Nova early on in Pool 3, especially in a deck where you're already running Killmonger. Iceman, obviously we already covered, just a great on-reveal. Scorpion, great on-reveal. Okoye, so with the Odin deck, you need on-reveals that are good before turn 6. With the Wong deck, they can also be good on turn 5, right? So Okoye is not the best on turn 5. You could have that be the other Nakia, right? Give your leftmost cards +2 power. Doubling that is also quite good. But I like having 2-drops, basically. I like being able to curve out slightly faster than that. And being able to maybe deploy more than 1 card on turn 5, right? Nakia locks you to like a kind of an awkward turn 5 a lot of times. So we haven't covered this yet. A 2/2 on reveal, give every card in your deck +1 power. So again, like if you play her on 2, she's kind of like a 2/6 if you end up playing all those cards that you've drawn. But even as like a 2/4 or a 2/5 spread out over a couple different cards, like pretty good stat line. Scorpion we already covered. Getting a double Scorpion on 5 is usually better than getting a double Okoye on 5. Or so if you play Wong on 4 and you're kind of wondering how you should navigate your turn 5 and you don't have like Tiger or Gamora, go with like the Scorpion over the Okoye is like a pro tip. Ironheart we've already covered, just great when you double him up. Wolfsbane great when you double him up. Killmonger, we talked about the very funny interaction, but is mostly here because we only play 2 1-drops and one of them we want destroyed, and your opponents might play more than that and not want them destroyed. Groot, we haven't played any of the Guardians yet, so Groot is a Guardian card, so he has the on reveal, if your opponent played a card here this turn blank, his is gain 2 power, so he becomes a 3/6 if you can soul read your opponent. But also, you can do like Groot into a lane on 3, Wong on 4, and then on 6 if you Odin, and your opponent played there, Groot goes off twice. And so even if you miss the first time and he's just a 3-4, he becomes a 3-8 on turn 6, in addition to like the Odin stuff. So just like, you know, you get multiple bites at the apple with the Odin thing happening on turn 6. White Tiger is pretty good as a 5-1 that makes a 5-7. She's incredible as a 5-1 that makes 2 5-7s, and she's game breaking as a 5-1 that makes 4 5-7s. Gamora is another Guardians card, 5-7. If your opponent played a card here this turn, plus 5 power, so she can be a 5-12. She can tango with the base Hulk if you soul read, but also on turn 6, she can beat anything. And if she beats anything, if you Wong into Gamora and your opponent played a card, what is she? She's a 5-17. She just wins you that lane. And if the card they played was Cosmo, but you revealed first anyway, it doesn't matter because they just can't win. It's great. And then obviously, if you're playing this deck, you already know Odin. 6-8, on reveal, activate all on reveal abilities of cards at this location, so he just doubles your on reveals again. Yeah, the Odin deck is really good, so you probably already know it. This is basically just that deck, but with Wong. And then the upgrades would be... Oh, Rocket Raccoons is a stand-in for Drax, is like a 4-4 that gets +4 if you soul read your opponent. That's just like an option, but I don't know if it's better than Groot, because the thing is, on turn 4, you want to be playing Wong. You don't want to be playing anything else. Like, if you have any option, Wong is the best option in this deck. So, this was just a stand-in to let you know that Drax exists and is a pool 3 card, but, like, I like Groot and Gamora on either side of Wong, but not necessarily Drax, which competes with it. Hazmat has the same caveat here as she had in the last time we mentioned her. You only play Hazmat if you also open Luke Cage and not otherwise, because she afflicts all cards with -1 power. So while doubling that is very cool and nice, and if your opponent has a lot more cards than you, can be good, it's just not worth it unless you have Luke Cage. And even then, again, like big asterisks, because I don't know if it's worth playing. I don't have Luke Cage, so I haven't tested this at all. It's just a thing that I see. But, like, from playing against it, my opponent usually loses because I'll just silence Luke Cage, or worse, I'll steal his buff with, like, Rogue. And then your stuff, if you don't know how Luke Cage works, so he reads, your cards can't have their power reduced. But just so you know, they're still tracking, your cards are still tracking how much power they would have been reduced were you not to have Luke Cage. So if you steal Luke Cage's buff, those cards regain all those negatives. It's not like it's not like in Magic where a card might say like, your cards can't have -1 counters placed on them, and like those cards don't track how many counters they would have had. They just don't get the -1. This isn't like that. These cards, they remember how many minuses they're supposed to have, and if Luke Cage ever goes away, they will reclaim those minuses happily and lose you the game. Mystique, obviously, just incredible as a second Wong. Just Mystique is the absolute MVP. Pick her up as fast as you can. And again, Doctor Doom, just really a solid all-around good card. Putting 2 Doombots in each lane, a 10 power swing in 2 lanes, plus the 5 in your own lane. Really, really good. So that's it. That was 5 decks that were 1 card upgrades and then additional upgrades after that. I hope that this absolute info dump has been helpful. And again, like, we're shooting for 100 subscribers. If you are here at almost an hour into listening to this weird person talk about this esoteric card game, you should probably be subscribed because you are my target audience. It costs you nothing and it means a lot to me. So thank you everyone who continues to support me. I appreciate you all immensely, and I will see you tomorrow.